Alice, I think you might be on mute. Shall I?
Okay.
Yeah, are you okay?
Am I muted?
I can hear you. No,
okay,
I can hear you. Hi, it's quite unfair of me to come to you first because you only managed to join just at the last minute. So sorry to kind of rush you into a question, but I just wondered, as an economist, Bezos has had to upend his business model. He has had to jettison his fundamental promise of 1 or 2 day delivery on Prime. He's had to make over 150 process changes to his company to even start to bear the weight of the increased orders from COVID. From an economics perspective, do you think that, what do you think the risks and what do you think the opportunities are for Amazon in this pandemic?
Okay, well, may I just say, let's just focus for 1 minute on the magic of marketplace as a flex factor for consumer demand. I think the extraordinary reactivity of marketplace and with the issues we know in the warehouses, in the international supply chains and so on, with the issues around, of course, halting delivery of certain lines that were considered non-essential. The fact is, what we saw in Amazon's results was an extraordinary opportunity. In the UK, the ONS reported retail sales for the month of April, the only month of lockdown that we've ever experienced in this, in certainly my existence. Online went from 22% of retail excluding fuels to 30% in 1 month. And guess who was behind that? And that is almost entirely Amazon, because Ocado, Waitrose, and so on refused to take any new clients for their grocery delivery services. So we had some supply side constraints there too. Amazon is in a position to become an absolute juggernaut as a result of the paradigm shift we were seeing in the UK. Online has sort of stagnated at about 20% of retail for about 5 years. And people, part of it was because retail was booming. So, level decline, increase in online. In fact, online sales fell, but the share rocketed. In my mind, I anticipate that in 2020, we will have an online share of retail in a range of 25 to 27%, given our perspective on the rest of the year in terms of level of retail sales and accessibility of physical retail space. That is a paradigm shift that only Amazon is equipped to surf. That's quite remarkable. I think this has made their lives a whole lot easier in relation to competition from multi-channel retailers. I think their survival is very, very much in question. Many pure play online players dabbled in verticals Amazon didn't dabble in, like fast fashion. They're finished. I think it's a time when the whole issue of marketplace, which, as you know, is under investigation in the United States and elsewhere, the sheer dependence of the consumer on Amazon has never been more salient.
Well, I think that's a really, really good summary of the economic position. Franklin, I wonder if I could turn to you. I mean, obviously, Amazon cares a lot about the numbers and its results, but it's also got other things that it cares about. It cares about the regulatory position that it finds itself in, and it cares about its overall reputation. And I wonder, you wrote about the tech clash as far back as maybe 2017, maybe even earlier. Do you think that in 2020, COVID-19 might offer Amazon the chance of a redemption in the minds of consumers and regulators?
I think that Bezos stumbled out of the gate in terms of response to the virus, in a couple of regards. One is Amazon's infrastructure, as vast and as well built as it is, was just simply not able to carry the demand that was placed on it by the virus. I mean, they've described themselves, or some of the tech companies have described themselves as a utility. Some of Amazon's critics describe it as a utility, and that function was on full display at the beginning of the virus, when it was the only means that people felt like by which they could acquire toilet paper and kind of the essentials for life. And so Amazon, Bezos, I think a lot of us kind of who both are, I'm a critic of Bezos and an admirer of him, an admirer of kind of what he has built, even as I'm terrified by it and think it needs to be constrained. And I, part of me wanted to see him step in and solve all of our problems. That if somebody understood how to manage a supply chain, it was Bezos. And what did we face? We faced these enormous supply chain problems when it came to masks and ventilators and the like. And instead of stepping in and playing a public role, he stepped in and he tried to make sure that the essentials of Amazon worked. And now, as we're kind of moving out of the first, whatever it is, the 2 months of lockdown, Amazon is pulling back the restrictions that they'd initially placed on purchases through Amazon Prime. They're shipping much more quickly. He was able to kind of, I think, very quickly step in and solve some of the just enormous logistics problems that Amazon faced. Now, the other thing, of course, is the warehouse workers, who were kind of these invisible figures in our system, and we've watched as they've been, outbreaks have occurred in Amazon warehouses, and that's put a certain other sort of pressure on Bezos, which he's been trying to get ahead of over the course of the last couple of years, as in the United States he's boosted minimum wage in Amazon warehouses. But that's an issue that's not going to go away for him until Amazon fully roboticizes its warehouses. But
Frank, on the warehouse employee point, I mean, we've spoken in terms of our investigation to multiple workers who at least allege that Amazon made a number of really big missteps in their response to COVID in relation to employees. You mentioned one of them, which is not starting off on the front foot. And from March to early April, it seems that there were masks that were lacking. The managers had very inconsistent responses according to which fulfillment center you worked in. And then you had the resignation of Tim Bray, the distinguished engineer at Amazon. And that marked presumably a moment when there was solidarity between Amazon's executives and their warehouse workers. And I'm interested to hear whether you think that will represent some momentum in terms of how Amazon's relationship with its employees, whether it would change for good.
So I think that Amazon recognizes that, first of all, it's one executive showed solidarity with its workers. It wasn't that there was a managerial cast within Amazon that suddenly was on the brink of revolt. But I think that this is, and I think, but it does represent this fissure that we see in other tech companies between kind of the rank and file engineers and management, that you have, because the tech companies exist in kind of liberal, urban, cosmopolitan settings. You have engineers who don't want Amazon to work in league with the Pentagon or with the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. You have engineers who don't like the idea of, or salespeople or whatever in Seattle who don't like the idea of their warehouses being portrayed as kind of the successor to Sinclair Lewis. Sinclair Lewis. So I do think that this is a long-term problem for them. And, I think that the biggest problem that they face, which you alluded to, is that they're the subject potentially of congressional investigations in the United States and potentially antitrust action brought by either the Federal Trade Commission or the Department of Justice. And all of these optical questions ultimately influence their political position within Washington. And we just saw a Democratic presidential primary where candidates who used to inhabit what you would call the center left of the Democratic Party were joining the populists on the left to beat up on Amazon.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just before I turn to Zachary, I just wanted to reiterate, if you want to say anything at any point, then please put up your blue hand and I'll come to you after I ask Zachary. As an investor, do you, I mean, I don't know if you invest in Amazon personally, but if you were talking from the perspective of an investor, would you be concerned only with Amazon's results, the bottom line and the top line, in terms of its response to COVID? Or do you think that there are other factors that are relevant? Franklin mentioned the political factor. You had a position where you went from Bezos being called Jeff Bozo by Trump to Mike Pence thanking him publicly on Twitter for keeping supplies going during COVID. Is that relevant to how you see Amazon getting through COVID?
Well, first of all, Trump still hates Bezos, so I don't think COVID's changed that particular dynamic. Bezos still owns the Washington Post personally, which is extraordinarily against Trump, and Trump, in his infinite